Am I in the light or the dark? Light. You can see me. Thank you. Always in the light. That's the truth. That's the truth. How many of you are here at Unity for the first Christmas since you started coming here? Raise your hand if this is your first Christmas. So welcome. Thank you for doing this together with us today. And as you can see, we're in the spirit. We're focusing on Christmas for the next few weeks. And it's an opportunity for us to be reminded of what Christmas is about at Unity. I was raised in a traditional Christian church where it was a focus on the birth of Jesus, the Christ child, born in a manger in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago. And the word Messiah was attached to Jesus as the one who was here to be our salvation. It was salvation from an early story in the scriptures of Adam and Eve disobeying God and being cast out of the garden, and that Jesus was sent to be a salvation for us so that we no longer had to worry about a sinful nature and that we could experience eternity with God. And then I met Unity, and my point of view changed about the Christ child, about the idea of salvation, about where our focus lies. And one thing we do maintain from the traditional story is the person Jesus. Jesus is an expression of the Christ Spirit, and that human being that Jesus was, as you and I are, was more importantly and more truthfully an eternal spiritual being, and we would say was the fullness of the Christ Spirit in expression in his life. And that as he came into that awareness about who he was, he lived a life that was what we would refer to as our way shower. He demonstrated to the rest of us what it's like to live knowing you are an eternal being. You are the light of the world. The Christ in Jesus is the same Christ Spirit that's in you. And that the salvation that we seek is not changing the blueprint of that Spirit. The Christ Spirit cannot be any more perfect and whole than it is. But it is an opportunity for us to restore our understanding of that. So our salvation is when we come into an awakening that we are the Christ Spirit in expression in this human experience. So for some of us, that might be new, that might be uncomfortable, that might be something that is going to take you a while to let it sink in, but that's why we refer to Unity as progressive Christianity. And we open our hearts to the idea of salvation because our desire is to do what I think one of the reasons we came here for, to allow the very fullness of God within us. And we would use, when we say the word Christ, we would mean it is God expressing uniquely as you. That's what the Christ Spirit is. God expressing uniquely as you, in spirit. And the sooner that we come into that awareness, actually, it's kind of a challenge, because not only do we need to first of all open up our heart to that idea that the Christ dwells within us, but then to let the Christ lead our lives from the highest and best that we can be. So that takes a lifetime, maybe a few hundred lifetimes, maybe a few thousand lifetimes if you believe in reincarnation. Our co-founders, Myrtle and Charles Fillmore, believed in reincarnation, but they didn't make it a part of Unity as a thing that everyone must subscribe to. You just follow your heart and you'll figure it out after you leave the body, one way or the other, right? So we are looking at how to express the divine, experience the divine, come to know the divine more clearly in this Christmas season. And I'm just going to ask you for the next few weeks to stay open to as many opportunities as you can find to be the fullness of that, and experience a mystic Christmas season. When I talk about mystic, I talk about a literal experience of God. We talk about metaphysics in unity as absolute spiritual principles. It's kind of a heady intellectual understanding. But when you want to have a mystical experience, for me, it's about literally feeling, being completely aware in my being of the presence of God in and as me, that in God I live and move and have my being. So if we're not going to do it at Christmas time, when should we do it? To become aware of that Christ spirit that is born in each one of us every time we remember who we are and we allow that spirit to express fully. So this month we're talking about understanding God, we're talking about relating to God and expressing God more deeply in our lives. And when I was in English class in grammar school, one of the things that they taught us about was speaking from first, second, and third person. Anybody? Does that sound familiar? So what is first person? What kind of words would you use to express first person? I am. And what is second person? You. And what is third person? They. I'm also going to say it. I'm also going to say all that is. As third person, it's kind of when you're talking about things. Now, go back to the song where I asked you to find words. Look at those descriptive words of God as third person descriptions of God. When we see God as light, that's referring to God, experiencing God in the third person. Because we will each have a general idea of what God is, but it can express in infinite ways, right? God is infinite and is in many forms and shapes in the physical, this dimension, this human dimension that we live in, but also in the spiritual dimension. And let's face it, dimensions we know nothing about right now or we can't remember. So when you've got infinity to work with, God can have many names, right? And we sing a song that has many names, yet is beyond all names and forms. Do you remember that song that we sing? Just another example. And if we're going to have a mystic Christmas, I'm going to encourage you to keep integrating all these different forms, understandings of what God is as you seek to experience them. And honestly, when you talk about God as rhythm or rhyme, doesn't that kind of give you a sense in your beingness about that better than he, or at least in addition to he? So I kind of feel it, you know, when I speak of God as the rhythm and the rhyme of my life, I can literally kind of feel that sense of motion and fun and beauty. I mean, we could just go on and on. So let's turn to Jesus, our way shower, and see how he referred to these various persons of God. He talked about God, that's third person. So when we talk about God as peace or light, that's one way to do it. Up here on the screen from the book of John 4, he said, God is spirit. So spirit is another name for God. And those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. Use whatever definition of spirit or worship that you want. That's the joy of it all. When you're working with infinity, you get to decide for yourself how to have that mystical experience of God as spirit. And then he spoke to God, which would be the second person. It's like he's having a conversation with God. And so in the book of John 17, the glory that you have given me, I have given them. He's talking about his disciples, so that they may be one as we are one. So he's acknowledging in his consciousness to God, in God consciousness, that the two are one. And then he spoke in first person. What would he have said in the first person? I am. I am. So in all throughout the book of John, but there's others in the four Gospels, I am the light of the world, the way, the truth, the life. I'm the door. I'm the living bread. I am the resurrection. He was owning his Christ spirit. He was owning the fact that he was a demonstration of God expressing. And that in each one of those descriptions, I'm the light, I'm the way, I'm the truth, those meant different things to him. And he was trying to get messages across by speaking of himself that way, but as God. And yet, the wild thing is, he would say, why do you call me good? There's only one that is good, and that is God. So he's talking about God. Now he's back in third person. So if you're interested in just seeing how many ways God shows up in Jesus' life and disciples' life, just go through those 4 Gospels. And I tell you what, if you want to have fun, go pick up a copy of the Gospel of Thomas. Thomas is just a book of sayings, just little short phrases. There's not a real narrative going on there, but there are some wild and crazy things in there that kind of excite me as far as how to look at God. So I'll encourage you to do that. So to put all 3 in perspective, if we say up here on the screen in third person, God is peace, for instance. That's a descriptive word that has a meaning to you. God is peace. Or we could say in second person, God, give me peace. Now we've kind of separated ourselves from God, and we're asking for something to come to us as God, as peace. And then in first person, I am the peace of God. I am peace. So in those 3 forms of expression, you can have 3 different experiences of God. Can you see that? Can you see how you can be open to God, to know more, to relate, to have that deep mystical experience of what it means to you? Your heart will tell you. And in this week especially, we're going to focus on God as the third person. So if we look at the Old Testament, which is the Judeo-Christian view of what God is, from the book of Psalms, you can see a lot of the third person in Psalms. But in Psalm 36, it was written, how precious is your steadfast love, O God. All people may take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house, and you give them drink from the river of your delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light, we see light. So shout out some descriptive words there that the psalmist is using to describe God. Love, river, abundance, wings, light, river, refuge, delights, fountain, life. Yes. So again, if you just want to take those scriptures to meditate on, just take one word at a time and imagine what that description is of God expressing in your life or as you, and become more deeply acquainted with God expressing as you. Also, unity came into being as part of the New Thought movement back in the 1800s. And just prior to that happening, the Transcendentalists came on the scene. And they were those that were the first really to take us outside of the traditional Christian view, but still be involved in it. And for them, the Transcendentalists would say that God is all that is, that we can see God in a grain of sand, that we can experience God in every breath that we take. It is the breath of life. So instead of seeing God as the human man form on a throne in heaven, it was a presence that was everywhere. And right around that time, one of the well-known hymns in Christian churches and probably in Transcendentalist gatherings is "For the Beauty of the Earth." Anybody know that hymn? I'm going to put you on the spot, and we're all going to sing it. I got a croaky throat today, but sing it with me if you know it. I'm going to sing low. For the beauty of the earth, for the glory of the skies, for the love which from our birth over and around us lies. Lord of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. They were bringing the physical beauty of life all around them as descriptions of what God was in their life. And then obviously prior to them, was the community of Native Americans who saw their presence of the divine as creator, as great spirit, connected to the great web of life. That was their description of God, the great web of life, which ties everything together, and saw God as an expression through animals, through rocks, through trees, through clouds, through the sun, all parts of the earth and yet part of God expressing. And right around this time as well, in the 1800s, was writings from poets and philosophers and prophets. Obviously, William Blake might have been during that time, to see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. That is definitely getting into a mystical experience of the divine. To literally hold infinity in the palm of your hand. The left brain is going, what? I don't understand that. So just work with the idea of infinity. You know, when I'm trying to explain unity to someone, I tend to use the word omnipresence because to me, that helps us I'll say lean into the idea that we're never separate from God. No one is separate from God. And it's an opportunity for us to allow the idea that you don't have to follow a single spiritual path to be on your spiritual path. There is no one right path to God. And if you meditate on the idea of omnipresence or infinity or eternal, first of all, it should blow your left brain out of your head. But also it just gives you an idea that, okay, if omnipresence is for real, then God is everywhere all the time, and we can never be separate from it, and it doesn't matter what path you're following, or if you're not following one at all, you are still in and as the presence of God. John Muir, somebody from California that I became familiar with, said that when we try to pick anything out by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. What a beautiful way to say that we're all tied together. And it's because we are all part of the same foundation. Just as science is telling us that there's one single unified field of energy, in the same way, the prophet from thousands of years ago, Jeremiah, said, "Do I not fill heaven and earth, says the Lord?" I mean, that's another one I use regularly when people are saying, God is not in you until you're born again. And I would say, do I not fill heaven and earth? Are you not, am I not part of heaven and earth? Therefore, I am as filled with God as can be, and so are you. Not that I like to get into those discussions unless they have ears to hear, but I'm just telling you, that's my go-to, is working with that idea. And Kabir, the Persian poet, said, behold the one in all things. It's the second that leads you astray. Can you hear that wisdom in there? As soon as you start, well, let's face it, and I would have long discussions with other Unity ministers about this. The minute we use the word God, we've introduced a second. Do you see that? Because we can't have an English language or a discussion really without doing it. And that's okay. It's just one of those first, second, or third person ways that we come to understand God. But it's a chance to recognize that on the whole, from the highest point of view, there's only one here. And I'm going to show you how it shows up in so many different ways. We talk about metaphysics here at Unity as principles that never change. They're absolute in nature. We would call them demonstrations of truth. And when we think of spiritual principles from a metaphysical point of view, the good news is that they are meant to guide us in how this universe works and what God's nature is. So to begin with today, I want you to look at these ideas of metaphysics but also see if you can become more open-hearted about what they are, and see if you can mystically experience these principles within you. So for instance, as Jesus said, God is spirit. When we want to know God as spirit, just work with the idea of omnipresence. Spirit is something that is a presence that fills heaven and earth, and everything is of it. Everything is of spirit. Think of it as the ground of being or the ground of existence. How is it that we exist? Have you ever asked yourself that question? How is it that we exist, that there is even a space, a place, a scenario that allows us to just be? Have you ever heard anyone using the word beingness? What is your beingness experiencing? What provided a way for you to be? To not only be in a body, but also to be in thought, to be in spirit. These are all ways that God expresses as us. Presence, essence, beingness. One of my favorite statements from Charles Fillmore is, I am now in the presence of pure being and immersed in the Holy Spirit of life, love, and wisdom. Will you say that with me? I am now in the presence of pure being and immersed in the Holy Spirit of life, love, and wisdom. And Emily Cady was one of our first Unity writers. She wrote Lessons in Truth, and she said, there's but one source of being. This source is the living fountain of all good, be it life, love, wisdom, power, the giver of all good gifts. You have power to draw on this source for all the good you are or ever will be capable of desiring. That sounds pretty infinite to me. And available to all of us. God is spirit. We also speak every week here to say that God is power. I want you to just, if you can do it while you're at a table, is to just lift up your right knee and then your left knee and feel the energy that's required to do that. That somehow, something in your brain and my words sent a thought to your knees. And it's requiring not only divine intelligence, but it's also requiring motion, activity, a force. That's not God giving you power. That is God as power that is raising your knees up and down. When you go up the stairs at home or when you take a walk around the block and suddenly you're starting to feel a little bit tired, think of God as power in you. That's what we would call a mystic experience of God as power, to literally associate the feeling of motion in your body as a demonstration of God power in your body. And we speak of God as power, omnipotence, as only one, right? There's no two powers. There's no power of evil. Talk to me afterwards if you have a problem with that. But it's knowing that if God is for us, there can be no power against us. And from Jesus' words in Matthew 12, every kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and no city or house divided against itself will stand. If there was good and evil in the same universe, the universe would collapse. So keep your focus on God as power. When you listen to the news and you hear countries warring against each other, and remind yourself, over and above the ego, choosing to inflict harm on another because that ego feels separate, alone, helpless, or hopeless, and its only way to be okay is to hurt someone else. That activity that they're choosing to participate in is a choice based on error thinking. That's evil. A conscious choice made because we feel it's the only way to get what we need. But it is not, there's no force behind it of good. The only presence and power of God is available to us, but we must choose how it is directed. Omnipresence, everywhere present. And we also can think of God as law. Now, a lot of times, especially if you go clear back to the Old Testament and the Ten Commandments, that's what Jews would refer to as the law, was the Ten Commandments. However, think of law as that which runs the universe, that which turns the earth, that which we might consider to be gravity, knowing that if I were to step off a 10-story building, unless I lose a few pounds, I'm probably going to hit the ground, because that's the law. But I also look at the story of Jesus walking on water. Where did the power or the law of gravity get lost in that? Because he knew another law. He was able to transfer his weight from human weight to a different frequency, a higher frequency, like a feather. So when you know who you are, when you can experience God in you from the infinite realm, where all things are possible with God, you can do things very differently than most human beings can do. So we've got limitless capacity, and we can express in many different ways. I mean, I'm not a big student of this, but there's probably some spiritual paths who believe that a human being can transform themselves into something other than human. Have you heard that? Or a human being can transform, hey, how about fish and loaves? You know, five fish, 2 fish, 5 loaves. There it is. What if those are transformed into hundreds of fish and loaves? Because someone knows a different law and knows how to use that law in such a way that we can create whatever it is that we want. So there's work to be done, and it's certainly a mystical experience when you create change in fun ways, in creative ways in your body. Right now, I'm mystically busy changing this. And I am having fun watching how it is changing. And I'm using the divine idea of thought and belief. I'm using the power of God, associating it with the power of love, which is another way that God expresses. And I am regularly having to take my ego and put it in the back seat and say, just wait, be patient. Because it requires an energy from me that I'm not used to using so strongly. And I'm realizing how much work there is for me to do in staying on track instead of wanting to go back to the human way of living life and how easy it is to only believe in what we've known all of our life. So that's a chance for us to put the law into motion, which is another way that we see God. We see him as power, but we see that expressing through divine law. And, you know, one of the things that we often think of when we hear God and law is God is wielding the law and making a decision that you're not worthy or you're doing it wrong, you're going to be punished, you're not going to get the good that you want. That's not the kind of law that we think of when we talk about God as law. We just simply talk about that law of mind action, that law that says when you hold something closely in consciousness until you feel an agreement with you, you are now activating a law that is present in this universe all the time, and it treats everyone the same. It works the same for every person who knows how to use it. Jesus said in Matthew 5, he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. It doesn't matter who's using the law. No one gets preferential treatment. If there's one thing that, I won't mention his name, but if there's one thing that a well-known minister says often is that certain people have favor with God. And I would say no. There's a divine law that treats everyone the same. And the person that decides how the law is going to work in your life is you. So wouldn't it be nice to say, I don't have to worry about God withholding my good from me because he's in a bad mood today. I can always know that as long as I understand and I can relate to what God is, as law, I can use it as it's been designed to be used. It's to provide for my good. So how do I want to see God today? How do I want to experience him in my life? I also, if you heard me just say him, that's a Baptist tradition that I was raised in. And every once in a while it slips out, but as often as I can, I try and use it as it. I try to speak of God as it, because male, female, doesn't matter, but I am trying to undo some of those built-in beliefs in your mind about God, to try and get God as a human male sitting on a throne, and think more of God as that presence that can express as male. Men in the room, those who identify as male, that would be an example. That's about as mystical as you can get. And if you identify as female, that's an expression of the divine. We know God as mother, father, male and female, but we also know God as all that is. Think of it as that which fills heaven and earth, and that it's available to us to become and express however our heart guides us to. And then we think of God as mind, probably one of the most important ways that we experience God, and that is that everything begins in mind. There's pretty much nothing that happens to us in life or that we choose to happen in life that doesn't first begin in mind. Even if it's the superconscious mind that is within us, that's the Christ mind within us. And ideally, we go to bed at night and say, when I get up in the morning, subconscious, I only want you to listen to my higher self, the superconscious, the Christ mind, because that's the mind of God expressing uniquely as us, and it always knows where I should be going because I chose it for myself. I made the plan for my life because I am God expressing as Kitty. So, you might run into this God's will thing, but keep in mind that God's will is your will because you are God expressing. And it takes for those of us who are stubborn as children, it takes that fight out of us when we realize, oh wait, I am God. I do get to choose for myself. So when I wonder what God's will is, I basically am trying to mystically connect with what feels best in my heart. That's us experiencing the divine mind and wanting to communicate through our feelings. Charles Fillmore said that the next great proclamation of scientific minds will be that one directive intelligence is an essential cause of the harmonious universe. He's wanting science to catch up with that idea, that there's one intelligence that's creating harmony in the universe. And Emily Cady saying that it's the divine mind is just waiting to be called on to teach us the truth about all things. So seek and you shall find, as Jesus said. You have to ask the question first and allow that divine mind to share with you. We know God as substance, another word that is hard for some of us to remember, but I'll tell you a little story. If you might have heard it in the past, but it's meant to be a joke. So one day, a group of scientists got together and they decided that man had come a long way in our development and we no longer needed God. So they picked one of the scientists to go and tell him that they were done with him. The scientist walked up to God and said, God, we've decided that we no longer need you. We're to the point that we can clone people and do many miraculous things. So why don't you just go on and get lost? And God listened very patiently and kindly to the man. And after the scientist was done talking, God said, very well, how about this? Let's say we have a man-making contest. To which the scientist replied, okay, great. But God added, now we're going to do this just like I did back in the old days with Adam. And the scientist said, sure, no problem. And he bent down and grabbed himself a handful of dirt. And God looked at him and said, oh, no. You go get your own dirt. So think of the dirt as divine substance, that which is the essence, the spiritual energy of all that is. And how much is there? Infinite. So it's like if we want to mystically experience substance in our life and we are struggling financially, We want to come back to an awareness of this field of essence of energy that's filling heaven and earth and saying, this is my supply. Substance is my supply. And how do I access it? I plant my ideas into it. See it like a field, a farmer's field, and it's energy that responds to ideas. That's how we come to know. This presence is planting ideas into it and holding those ideas in mind long enough that the energy starts to gather around it until it manifests in your life. God is substance. And finally, God is love. We think of, it's hard for people to say what is love. I mean, when you're put on the spot and asked to define what love is, it's amazing how many points of view there are about what it is. But it's also something that we don't typically think of when we associate it with God. We think of God as loving, but in unity, we literally describe God as the love itself, which means it's a power. It's the one power, and its nature is love. So the nature of love is about creating good, about holding everything together for the highest good. Think of all the stars and planets in the sky, in this universe, as being held together by a power of love, whose will and behavior is to make things work together in harmony. And so that's, to me, one of the simplest ways to solve every problem is turn it over to love and trust it, God as love, to manage whatever that situation is for the highest good of everyone involved. It's a perfect prayer that requires no real effort on our part except to see love, to know that it's present in us and working through us, and get our thoughts to agree with it. When we say we are loving, it's our chance to see everyone that we typically speak badly about. It's our chance to say, I desire good for you, and I see good in you. It's wanting good for others. It's seeing good. It's being a presence of good in other people's lives. That's love. And Charles Fillmore said it's the power that joins and binds in divine harmony the universe and everything in it. It's a state of consciousness that sees good everywhere and in everyone and draws good to it. And Myrtle said, be still and know that at this moment, your heart is the altar of God, of love. Love so sure and unfailing, love so irresistible and magnetic that it draws your supply to you from the great storehouse of the universe. So how about if we take this into meditation and give ourselves a chance to mystically experience a description of God or two that allows us to literally feel God expressing within us. If you just find a comfortable spot in your chair, and just start with that chair. Feel its support underneath you. And underneath your chair, there's a floor, and underneath the floor, there's a planet. So just allow yourself to feel all of that support beneath you so that you can literally, completely let go and relax into that support. You feel the muscles in your legs relaxing. You feel your tailbone resting comfortably on the chair, and your back leaning easily into the back of your chair. You sense the comfort of the air around you, where you're feeling warm and have everything that you need to be able to breathe comfortably. You're sitting in a space that's filled with beauty and lights that remind you of the creativity of God. You hear the harmony of notes in the air. What we might refer to as a keyboard, but it's really just the frequency of sound, the vibration of various harmonies coming together. Now I'll ask you to translate all of that, the support of the chair and the earth, translate the structure of your body, your spine, the sound of the notes, the softness of the lights. Be aware of it and allow it to actually be the presence of spirit, of light. Allow that entire support system and softening that's going on around you as the divine serving you, calming you, providing for you. Just take a moment in the quiet to feel that presence expressing in all these ways for you right now. And turn your thoughts now to the idea of harmony. What is happening in you and through you right this moment that is evidence of harmony? If you can sense all the ways that harmony is working in your body right now as life, as intelligence, as understanding and creativity, all different ways that God is expressing as you and through you right now. Allow the feeling, the thought of gratitude to rise up in you. So thankful that this omnipresence is caring for us in so many ways. And as I think about what might be on my to-do list this week, choose one action that you might incorporate the divine presence moving in and through you. Perhaps you have a project you're working on that requires divine intelligence, and that you might know God as the solution. God is my source of ideas. Perhaps you're caring for a loved one that's physically ill. And take a moment to allow the presence of life in you to shine brightly as we hold that image in them, that our loved one is filled with that divine life, renewal, strength, power. Perhaps there's extra expenditures needed this month. You wonder how you might be able to afford it all. Come to that knowing of God as substance, like golden snowflakes, the kind you don't have to shovel, falling all around you as a spiritual essence that becomes our daily bread. And there is no limit to this provision. As I know God as my sustaining source, I relax and take a deep breath, breathing in my good, breathing out any concern. God is my source. There is no lack. We are in the presence of pure being, and we now allow God's life and love, God's substance and intelligence to live and move and have its being in us. This is the truth of who we are. We now experience it in our being. We let go and let love work all things together for the highest good. And so it is.